arts, lifestyle. SNS Online.
Welcome, ScratchNSniffers, to the mysterious world of Howlround. Those magnificent magicians of radiophonic sound who can create a symphony from a stairwell, a concert from a creaky hinge, and a gargantuan G-flat from a garden gate. Where the macro and micro exist in perfect harmony or in imperfect synchronicity. The contradictions and the possibilities are endless. And where it transports your imagination, you know not where or when. And joining us in the studio today via sound waves travelling through the very air itself is Howlround creator and head composer, that enigmatic traveller in frequencies both high and low, for being known only as Robin the Fog. So, Robin, welcome to SNS Online. First question, what fired up your interest for all things radiophonic?
Hi, Nick. Thank you for having me.
Oh, yes. Shall I do that first?
No, this is good. Thank you for having me. I've got my muffin there.
Executive muffin, executive coffee.
Later. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I've got my coffee here, which is very
See,
nice.
any reason he agreed to do the show if he had posh coffee, so...
It's the perks.
We give good perks. So tell us about these radiophonics and how you got all fired up on it.
How did I first get fired up on it? On it like radiophonic.
Phonic. Like an old car bonnet. We could be here all day. Let's not.
Right. Okay.
Cut to the end.
Yeah. No. It was...
Was it things like Doctor Who or, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy,
weirdly,
that sort of stuff?
No, it wasn't. It actually wasn't that.
In tweaking.
Basically, when I was 11, I was watching Top of the Pops, and a band called Alternate were on, performing their then hit single, Activate. I found the performance on YouTube. It hasn't aged quite as well as I have, but I remember I would have been 11, and I remember thinking, oh, I really love those like laser noises in the song. Obviously, I realise now they're synth noises, but they're all these kind of splattery, squelchy noises that I really liked. And I started to get into, as you do, started to get into dance music and into rave music and into, jungle and hardcore and techno and all those things. And I started collecting records and trying to DJ, and then I went to college to do music technology. But gradually along the way, I realised that dance music and DJing, although I loved it, it wasn't really what interested me. It was something about the sort of the texture and the timbre of those sounds of the sort of electronic music, the way it feels like it's been bolted together from all kinds of different sonic events, and how some tracks almost feel like little mini sculptures, And then I sort of realised that when I was a kid, I noticed sounds a lot. I remember as like a 4-year-old noticing the sound the car made on gravel and sort of becoming quite fascinated with it. And I used to like watch TV programs, and I noticed that the sound of the train brakes on one James Bond film that I used to watch was exactly the same sound as a much bigger train on another James Bond film. So I'm not quite sure.
Nerd alert.
Borderline, yeah. But no, I have quite an obsessive personality, and I notice things like that. I notice details a lot. Unfortunately, I very seldom notice the bigger picture, but I always notice the details. And so
I think we're cut from the same cloth, sir. I mean,
yeah,
obviously,
I think so.
I think you've more sort of bent into one particular direction, but certainly certain sound effects like glass breaking, there seems to be a standard BBC, classic that you would hear.
As I got into, I did my music technology course, and I suddenly realised that the technology, and I stand by this to this day, the technology interests me up to the point that it makes ideas happen.
Yeah. But beyond that,
if you're just, literally, if you might go, well, that's very clever, but what are you actually doing with it? So the course I went on was all how. This is a sampler, this is how it works. This is an effects unit, this is how it works. And in hindsight, I was I wanted to make things. I wasn't really that bothered about why it did it, or, I wanted to know what I could do with it. And then I got given the chance to up it to a degree, which I did. And suddenly the tack changed, and it stopped being how and it started being why. So I started being suddenly exposed to all this amazing music that I'd never heard before. And obviously because my background was in electronic music and the sort of timbre and the tone of those sounds, I was already interested, which opened up the sort of doors for all kinds of experimental music. And one of my lecturers did a lecture on musique concrète, which is what I do now. And I realised that was the thing I'd wanted to do all along, was to actually use sound to make music.
So that actually led you into discovering the BBC Radiophonic Workshop and all the rest of it, and realising you had all these lovely bedfellows too.
Yeah, purely through that. I was, how old would I have been, 21? So I was quite young at the time, and I was quite a naive 21-year-old because I grew up in quite a small town and was the only person I knew who was into this kind of stuff.
Again, this sounds very familiar.
Yeah, right. And
so you weren't a science fiction rabid Doctor Who fan?
I enjoyed Doctor Who when I was a kid. I enjoyed it. I did watch it, but I wasn't obsessed with it. I enjoyed it.
I didn't say I was obsessed.
No one says you're obsessed. They just whisper it. But I enjoyed Doctor Who, and I think the weird thing is that the reason the modern ones I've seen, I've been very impressed with. I thought they were very well written, very well acted. But the thing is, they didn't have that make do and mend feel that the early Doctor Who's have, or my era was Sylvester McCoy.
We're too naive.
So they didn't have that very slight, and I realised, and obviously I'm talking in hindsight here, and I realised what appealed to me about it was that there was a very slight crapness about them. And I think British life, there's from Carry On films onwards, well, just, giving Carry On films as an example, we sort of celebrate the slight crapness of everything. Look at Harry Hill nowadays. His whole shtick
is celebrating crap.
Things are a bit crap, and the thing is, Radiophonic Workshop fit into that. Not crapness, but crap conditions. It's like, we need all this stuff. We're giving you no money. You've got a load of broken equipment. And so as a result, they have to work much harder to make it do what they want it to do. And if you look at the Sylvester McCoy era Doctor Who, which is what I grew up on, they have to work a lot harder to make it convincing because it really isn't. And you can see the zip on the creature's back still and all this.
No,
sort of
you
stuff.
can't.
Oh, you can sometimes. Well, look at. Do you remember Button Moon?
Yes. Well, you know who did the theme to Button Moon? Peter Davison.
Peter Davison, yeah. But the thing about Button Moon that I realise now is that the kid, you really have to suspend your disbelief. Because you can see the people in the background moving the puppets. You can see the strings moving the mouth. That it's really
this
obvious.
is all filtering through. I didn't hear any of that.
It's really obvious that the
no, it's not. No
spaceship
no
is a can of soup and a bathroom funnel. But you have to use your imagination, Nick.
Okay.
You have to use your imagination to make it work. And I think
I'm trying to use it at the moment. Robin.
And I think the thing I love is when, with musique concrète, with radiophonic workshop, when you meet it halfway.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
When you have to make you have to make the final connection yourself to make it into an actual thing. I think it's who was it said the uncanny valley. When something
Sally Rainwhite?
No, actually it was my friend
Wainwright even.
It was my friend Sarah Anglis, who's an amazing composer. She does stuff with dummies.
Okay. Legal.
And she says the thing is, when a dummy still looks like a dummy, people don't mind. But when it gets too realistic, when it enters the uncanny valley, they're freaked out.
Okay.
So I think, and Doctor Who, I think a lot of the dummies looked like dummies, and Button Moon, it still looked like objects. It's when it starts to become seamless and sort of start to look a bit.
But let's transpose that to audio only, which is the field you work in. And how do you even start to convey emotion or a soundscape, a different planet? Do you have a particular idea of what your audience is seeing, or are you allowing them just to step on board Fantasy City and to explore what they can in their mind, to take them where they want? Because that's what your music inspires to me.
It's a weird thing. I always say this with Howlround and with the kind of stuff I do. I always say it's a bit like a conjurer showing you how the trick was done, but it's still being magic. Because, so I'm always surprised by what I get. And the weird thing is, so much of what I get with Howlround isn't what I thought I would get. And it happens every time. And it's a philosophy that sort of I've built up as I've worked, not to start with. It's something that I've developed as I've carried on working, because the amount of times at the end of like a couple of hours of working on something, I've set off with one idea in mind, what I thought I would get, and 90% of the time I get something very, very different, and sometimes completely different to what I thought I'd get. Because the machines they're all mechanical objects, so they all have little foibles. They all have things that don't quite work, or they have little sort of foibles is the right word.
But you could expand that in art generally. I mean, when somebody starts to create a sculpture, they have an idea in their mind how it might look, and then it actually evolves into something quite different.
Exactly.
It could be the same with a novel or anything really. But
really nice Leonard Cohen quote: "There is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in." It's happened to me so many times with the new album, which has just come out, because it's a soundtrack to a film. And
you must name check all your albums.
The new album's called A Creak in Time, and the source material is all made from creaking hinges. In fact, one of them was a broadcasting house microphone. So we'll see if this one does anything.
Oh, yes, yeah.
Well, the ones downstairs make a much better sound. In fact, you can try your one, because you can try doing that.
Not getting much, no.
But downstairs you get the most amazing sort of like this kind of keening, wailing sort of sound when you move it like that. So some of the sounds were taken from that. Some were from a cupboard door in a ghost town in the Mojave Desert.
Oh, wow!
One was a log cabin in Yosemite when I was visiting a friend over there.
So do you just take your portable equipment around everywhere? And
I take a little digital recorder. I mean, I could take a reel-to-reel machine, but it would take up a lot more room, and the source material would be the same.
But then you bung it on reel-to-reel,
all the manipulation is done on tape. But I don't consider it cheating to have a little pocket recorder and just you've got to get it somehow, haven't you? Exactly. And the difference you'd get from digital to analog in that sense isn't that great. But obviously it's the manipulation that makes it interesting.
Okay. And you have a partner in crime as well.
Yes, I have Chris, who I work with quite often. I have to say at the moment, for various logistical reasons, most of the compositional stuff is still left to me.
Okay.
But I'm hoping in future when we perform together, we perform much more as a duo. But the actual composition and the loop cutting is, at the moment, largely falls to me. But I'm hoping we're going to work a bit more collaboratively. But anyway, what I was saying was, Steve, who was the filmmaker who made the film, I'd sent him a whole bunch of material for him to cut the images to. And I said I would send him some more. And he messaged me and said, "How's it going? Have you got anything new?" And I'd come to the end of about 2 or 3 hours, and I was literally seething because all the equipment had sort of been working really erratically, and I was getting all kinds of stuff that I hadn't wanted and wasn't expecting, and they were basically misbehaving, and I was really frustrated. But because Steve's quite a taskmaster, I thought I better send him something.
Let's just be clear. Steve is somebody who's created images to your music and put them on film or on YouTube? A
Creak in Time is available when you buy the LP. That's the soundtrack, but you also get a URL and a password to watch the film in full. And we do screen it in various places. We're screening it in Nuclear Bunker on Friday. We had a screening in St John in Bethnal Green a few weeks ago. It's appearing at a couple of festivals, I think, as well, little film festivals.
We'll get to the festivals in a bit.
But he basically said, "Have you got anything new?" So I sent him this, and I said in an email, "Look, I'm sending you this just to prove that I have been working on something, because it's been driving me mad." But and I hated it. Half an hour later, I got an email back saying, "This is the best thing you've ever done."
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and the weird thing is, and it is now one of my favourite tracks, but it's this weird thing where, when you're in there and you're in that situation and you're trying to make stuff, you go, it's like there's this thing where we still have this idea that we're the author, that it's just it's our pure undiminished, and it's total ego, but we all have an ego, so everyone falls. I certainly fall into that trap. I think most people do, but if you can detach yourself from that, and that's something I keep learning as I go, or failing to learn, or maybe I'm getting better at learning. If you're able to detach yourself from that and just accept what happens. Often it's not what you wanted, but it's actually something better than what you wanted. And I try and do that now. I try and when I work, I just try and set processes in motion and see where they go, and then I try and catch up. And I always say sometimes I make good music in spite of the machines, and sometimes it's the other way around. Sometimes they make good music in spite of me. But I think this is true in radio as well. Like when you finish this interview, presumably you'll cut out all the crappy bits, and then the remaining 35 seconds. But you see what I mean? I think that's what you do. You set all these processes in motion. You observe, you mix, you sort of muck around, see what happens, and then you go back over it. You do that as a creator, and then you go back over it as an editor, and you go, right, it really worked well here. It really worked well here. This isn't too bad. This stuff didn't quite work. And also the thing with tape is that initially maybe you're not getting anything, but after a while this sort of mulching process occurs, and it starts to change. The sounds start to change.
Starts to form and evolve. Let's listen to one of your tracks.
Okay. Very well.
A Creek in Time. Let's have an extract from that. An extract from A Creek in Time by HowlRound's Robin the Fog. You're listening to SNS Online, and if you want to comment on this or any other show, then please like our Facebook and Twitter pages, both SNS Online. Or if you want to email us, the address is snsonlineshow@gmail.com. All shows are free and downloadable on our SoundCloud page, so check us out. And please like and share everything.
I think you'd call that music, wouldn't you?
Do you think people who enjoy your music tend to have more of an active imagination or more of a healthy outlook on things, or I don't know. Is there a typical fan?
Do you think they enjoy their sex lives more?
Is there a typical fan, do you think? I mean, coming from my perspective, I'm a massive science fiction fan. Doctor Who used to buy these CDs, records of Doctor Who sound effects out of this world, all the rest of it, and I loved it.
You still have them, Nick?
I still have them, and they spiritually take me to
Have
other
you got high-tech effects?
times and places. No,
It's a very good one. Get a hold of a copy of that.
okay.
Loads of Dick Mills on it.
Loads of what?
Dick Mills. Dick Mills.
Right, okay.
Gosh, it's hard work.
I think we'll have to start again.
Where from?
About 1995.
Do I think people who listen to my music have more active imaginations?
Yeah.
I have literally no idea.
Oh, right. Right, next.
But it's a weird thing. People either don't get it. Most people don't really get it. Very few people say this is the worst thing I've ever heard. Some people are totally unmoved by it. They don't understand it.
But a lot of those people are people who enjoy more traditional music, who are expecting a chorus at some point, expecting a structure, but they're not expecting this freestyle way.
When you say traditional, I would say you mean more kind of pop music, or more sort of
yeah.
Am
I? Do you not agree with that?
No, I don't know really, because I've the people who do like it really love it. And the people who are into it are really...
But are they all a bit weird, Robin?
Everyone's a little bit weird. Possibly. I don't know.
No, I'm on your side. I'm just teasing you.
No, there's nothing wrong with a bit of weirdness.
No, absolutely not. Robin the Fog, what's that about?
It's a twofold thing. One is that I happen to really like foggy sounds and sort of...
Give us an example of a foggy sound.
Well, the most, like a lot of Howlround music does have a sort of smoky sort of fugginess to it, doesn't it? I also love foghorns.
Okay.
Or who doesn't love a good foghorn?
Absolutely. Bring it on.
There is another official story of how I earned myself the nickname, but I always say you have to buy me a drink before I tell you it.
Okay. You are called Robin the Frog occasionally on Six
totally,
Music.
Yeah, totally an error. Yeah, that is.
BBC Radio.
Music News.
Six Music.
With Georgie.
Let's hear about a new thing. October will see a programme of events take place across London called London Month of the Dead. Events include live music, historical lectures, taxidermy workshops, a magic lantern show.
Taxidermy workshops?
Yeah, and tea and cake in a death cafe. And it's going to take place... at Sorry, got a giggle. At Brompton Cemetery Chapel, a Victorian dome in the centre of the cemetery, and also Kensal Green Cemetery.
Oh, that's not near me.
So London manipulated sound duo Howlround. They work with tape loops and reel-to-reel tape recorders, field recordings and found sounds, and they're performing on the 9th of October by candlelight in Brompton Cemetery Chapel. So Elizabeth Olker spoke...
I haven't done anything this time.
Sorry. Spoke to Robin the Frog from the duo.
I see why you like it.
He told us more.
You don't choose your nickname, Nick. Sadly, it chooses you.
Absolutely.
That one chose me. So.
But your bread and butter job, you've just completed a 9-year stint as a BBC studio manager,
Nearly
that's right?
9, yeah.
And also, at the same time, you've been an independent producer, producing your own content, a lot of it linked to Howlround and other artists that you've admired.
Music and sounds and sort of cultural stuff that I've thought that I thought was interesting.
So Six Music, Today, quite a few different places.
PM,
Let's
World
roll through them.
Tonight, News Hour, Weekend, Jarvis Cocker's Sunday Service, The Freakier Zone, Late Junction.
So really, would you prefer to be described as a broadcaster, or a musician, or a studio manager?
This is the thing. One thing I've learned at the BBC is it's really dangerous to have one job title because it just ends up defining you. So I always refer to myself as a producer because I produce radio, I produce music, I produce, so I would call myself a producer.
Cool.
But
That sounds good to me.
Broadcaster sort of sounds a bit more like I should be wearing a sort of smoking jacket or,
Or
no.
a foggy jacket.
I have presented many times. I'm quite happy to present, but that's...
So you present for a Resonance FM, is that right?
Yeah, I have done, many times, countless times.
This program is brought to you by Resonance 104.4 FM.
You're listening to Resonance 104.4 FM. This is OST, the soundcheck show, normally presented by Mr. Johnny Trunk, but today presented by myself, Robin the Fog, and Strictly Kev, aka DJ Food. Hello, Kev.
Hi, Robin. How's it going?
Not too bad. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. It's very hot.
It is very hot today, isn't it?
Yeah,
It
very
is
sunny day.
It's beautiful. It's a sunny day, which is fitting because today we are doing a Sesame Street special. I mean, I usually try and, do a few things for them every year. I had a weekly show there until earlier this year when I had a bit too much on my plate, so I had to rest it. I'm sure it'll come back at some point. Yeah.
Cool. Scratch and Sniff with Nick Randell.
Let's talk about your albums. Let's actually start at one of your earlier tracks. And what was the first track that you really felt you were getting somewhere? You were understanding what all this meant to you, and
well, I hadn't made music for about 5 or 6 years. I had a block, and basically I just got really bored of cutting up samples and waveforms on a computer screen. Because I was making dance music at that point, and I just entered a total block with it, and I wasn't particularly in a jolly place at the time, so so I was just massively blocked and couldn't really do anything. But I always knew I'd come back to it somehow, and one day I was down in S6, which is the old Bush House studio. Now,
that's
sadly,
not Essex. That's S6, which is a studio at the BBC.
6. Mm-hmm. It's in the basement, or it was in the basement of Bush House. Now sadly gone.
It's a swimming pool now, apparently.
Is it? I've heard various stories, but and Thibaut, who was a fellow studio manager, he was recording his band down there. So Thibaut, as it happens, there was another SM called Dan Beban and a musician called Alexander Tucker who were recording an album in Bush House as well, and they left some of their tape loops around. And Thibaut said, "Oh, it's easy to make a tape loop. I'll show you." So we made this tape loop and we started mucking around with it. And I'd recorded myself because I knew I wanted to record the sounds of the building, because I used to whistle when I was walking around the building, and I loved the sounds of the whistle sort of echoing around these big high hallways.
That's what the noise was.
Oh, yeah.
At 3 a.m.
Actually, there was a door handle on the 5th floor of Bush House that made the most amazing squealing noise. And of course, because it had a high ceiling, it echoed. So I recorded that a few times. But yeah, I recorded myself whistling, and all I had with me at the time was my phone, and I recorded myself into my phone. And then we'd left some microphones out from a music session in S6, and I was the guy who was clearing up at the end of the day. And the tape loop was still on the machine, so I thought, oh, well, why not? So I got the recording of me whistling on my phone, played it, held it up in front of one of the microphones, pressed play, dubbed it onto the tape. And then I played it back at half speed, and suddenly, instead of my out-of-tune whistling, this kind of choir sound came out. And I thought, that's interesting.
So what track did that evolve into?
That was... the Resonating Stairwell.
Let's have a listen.
On the Ghost of the Bush.
So the next track from the Ghosts of Bush Fair, a very significant one for people from the BBC World Service, because that was recorded in Bush House. After approximately 80-odd years of working in that building for the BBC, we were moved to a new, exciting IKEA-themed building in Oxford Circus. But before we left...
Panopticon.
Yeah, absolutely.
The Panopticon furnished by Habitat, that's what I call it.
But before we left, you decided to get some classic sounds from Bush House and create a symphony, if you like. And
if I call it a symphony, but yeah. It was. I had 2 tape machines down in S6, and I used, basically, I would have, one had a tape loop on it, and I would record different loops of sounds onto that and dub them in. And I had another machine which was feeding the sounds back into itself, which is where the name Howlround comes from. So it was a machine that was recording and playing back simultaneously. And if you were careful, you could sort of set up this really nice kind of fuzzy tape echo sort of sound. So it's all about, if you hit the obviously if you go too far, it overloads and starts blowing you up. And if you don't do enough, it doesn't work. But if you can just sort of get it so it's sort of at its biting point, you can sort of have it sitting there kind of resonating really nicely. So yeah, and I would just build up layer after layer of sound and dub them in.
And this got quite a bit of airplay on the BBC, not surprisingly.
Yeah, did all right.
Yeah.
Sold quite well too.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
London take kira.
Let's run through your albums. How many have you had so far? And give us the names.
Okay, so 2012 was The Ghost of Bush, which is that one. 2013, Secret Songs of Savamala, which was recorded in Belgrade in Serbia.
Wow.
In the basement of this flooded customs house. Apparently just been used on the soundtrack to a horror movie.
Fantastic!
Allegedly. Well, it's still in the editing process.
Do you get any cash for it?
I very much doubt I'll get any cash for it.
No. Well, why would you? You only created it.
The guy who does all my mastering is the soundtrack composer, so he sort of borrowed a couple of things. And
okay.
So hopefully, I don't know, hopefully he'll push me a few quid somewhere at some point. That was recorded in Belgrade. Then there was Torrid and Gate, which was entirely recorded using a front garden gate. Contact microphone and another microphone picking up the sort of the real sounds of it, as it were, and the contact mic sort of attached to the metal. And it was a couple who, it was a Resonance FM auction prize, because they have a fundraising auction every year where people put up prizes for people to bid for. And Howlround's was, we'll make a composition out of your home. And these guys paid, I think they paid nearly 300 quid. So we went to their house to get our sounds, and we opened the gate, and we just stopped at the gate. We were like, okay, yeah, this is pretty good. So it's an album made entirely of the sounds of
One
Gabe.
album, a whole album made based on one sound.
Yep.
And what did the people feel? Well, they must have been
Tony
so
and Kath,
flattered.
Tony and Kath, I should
Tony
say, were
and Kath!
amazing. Because
Hello, Tony and Kath.
They gave us permission to release it.
Yeah.
Because originally, obviously, it was just for them. We did give them some material that was just theirs as well, but they allowed us to release it, which was amazing. And they still turn up at our gigs occasionally.
That's
as well.
so cool.
Yeah, really nice
That
people.
is
Both of them,
wonderful.
really lovely. After that, Tales from the Black Tangle, which is
Lovely titles.
Thank you. Four compositions, one of which is made entirely out of the creaking.
As you're
creaking mic
trying to now.
cradle. This one's a bit too oily. And also there was one that was made out of sort of foghorn noises and all that. That was actually the first time I'd ever used recordings I hadn't made myself, because it's very hard to get recordings of foghorns. So I had to cheat a little bit. Then there was a split cassette with the amazing Time Attendant, Time Attendant's amazing, actually. He does sort of synthesis type stuff, really sort of dense, really beautiful. We did a split cassette, one side each, on a Manchester label called Front and Follow.
Cassette?
Beautiful cassette.
On a
really
cassette.
lovely done, nice printing, nice cover, everything, yeah. It's called The Blow Volume 2. It's part of a series of cassettes they've released.
Wow. Cassette.
Yep, they're just about to release volumes 4 and 5.
Wax cylinder?
I think. Not yet, but I do have a friend who makes them.
Okay.
So I'm hoping at some point.
Of course you do, Robin.
I'm hoping at some point he's going to let us do something. And then the new one, which is called A Creek in Time, which is the film soundtrack. And at some point in the next few months, there's going to be a remix album of that coming out.
Fantastic. While we're talking about A Creek in Time, you probably don't know this, Robin, because I turned up with a comedy moustache and a false nose, and I infiltrated. Oh right, well my cover was blown straight away. I infiltrated the gig to check out how a live show with Howlround is done, and to speak to some of your friends. So a live version of Howlround is obviously quite different from the studio. It looks quite sort of frenetic and chaotic, but is that the idea, or is there suddenly any streamlined sort of focus to the performance tonight?
Well, I think it's basically I always say when it goes wrong, that's part of the performance, and it might not actually be wrong at all. It might just be another version of right that you hadn't thought about. So by sort of allowing a bit of chaos in and a bit of a chance to improvise, I think that's a nice, it sort of opens up, because in the studio, the studio and the live performances aren't a million miles apart, because it's all about manipulating tape. But with this, there's a sort of element of unpredictability to it, which can open up sort of interesting juxtapositions and scenarios and things.
So Chris, you're Howlround Mark II, The Revenge. So how would you sort of sum up Howlround live compared to in the studio?
In the studio, we tend to let things loop is probably the better word, for a longer time, and see how the different elements slip in and out of time together. So you might record something for like 10 minutes, which is barely changing, but you're in the studio, so you're just generating material. Live, we're moving a lot faster, and you're aware there's an audience, so you can't expect them to be listening for these microscopic changes in sound. So you kind of get. So we have this kind of theatre we've developed where I sort of either whisper to Robin or sort of tap on a tape, or Robin just goes, right, I've had enough of this loop, and
I completely ignore what you're saying. Go, I'll have that one, which has happened a couple of times by mistake.
Guys, good luck tonight. I'm looking forward to this live performance of Howlround.
Thank you very much, Nick.
So, the audience are taking their seats in anticipation for A Creek in Time. must say that went extremely well, celebrating both the macro and micro with images including landscapes, planets, stars, as well as extreme close-ups of everyday objects. Time to grab a drink now, and a word with the director himself, Steve McKinney.
So Steve, we've just seen the film, absolutely intriguing, a microscopic view of reality or other reality, whatever. Talk us through it. I had a very good reception here.
Okay, yeah, it was shot and over the course of about 2 years, which has been a collaboration with HowlRound, and we basically got together. We met through mutual friends, and we just chatted about our interests and what inspired us creatively, musically, filmically, and it all came down to the cosmos and the intrinsic connection between the macro and the micro. And it's been quite a journey, this whole process, because it has been a long time that we've been making this, and it's been unfolding in a natural way. The music is the driving force behind this. That is the inspiration to the film.
So some extracts there from a live gig in Eclectic in Waterloo, which also exists as a companion show to this, so do check that out on the SNS Online page on SoundCloud. As we're talking about live shows, let's expand that. What other shows have you done? Festivals as well. Let's talk about those.
This weekend coming, I'm playing the Delaware Road in Kelvedon Hatch Nuclear Bunker.
Wow.
So I'm in
an actual nuclear bunker?
Yeah, it's been preserved exactly as it would have been at the height of the Cold War. And we're doing this big sort of audio-visual sort of... everyone's using the word immersive now, but it is.
Immersive?
Everyone's using that word.
Okay.
But it's everywhere. There's performances going on all around the sort of complex.
And how do you attract people? I mean, presumably just internet, and I mean, are there particular sites that...
If I knew that, I'd tell you, but
okay.
I just keep telling people about stuff, and
you hope they turn up.
And some people do keep turning up. Some people turn up to everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, it isn't everybody's cup of tea. So once you find your people who are into it, you've got to.
But I must say, from the Eclectic show, it was clear that it's not just the music; it's the location you pick. It seems to be very important. High ceilings. It's the whole theatre of you running tape spools through a la Delia, Derbyshire, from
running
Doctor
tape
Who
loops around the building. It gives the performances a sort of sculptural feel as well.
Yeah,
it also
absolutely.
introduces an element of unpredictability. Because the machines are unpredictable, the way the loops will behave when they go around the space, that's unpredictable. So, we've had performances practically grind to a halt. But the thing is, again, it takes you out of your comfort zone. You have to keep going.
Yeah.
You have to find some way of keeping going. And there is a very real possibility that the performance will sort of implode and the audience will go home disappointed. That is possible. But that gives it a sort of a frisson, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just to say that in terms of the actual music, when you were, marrying music to images, I mean, it sort of creates to me a very sort of ethereal sci-fi movie, very filmic music.
Yeah, I think so.
If we sort of look to the future now, I mean, where do you see all this going? Could you see yourself being signed up to score a science fiction film? Because I think
the trouble is, I'd love to, and but the trouble with doing the tape music is it's like sort of people have said, let's collaborate. And the thing is, and I've said to them, the thing is with tape music, I never quite know what I'm going to get. So it's very hard to cut. I mean, the film was actually cut to the music because it's a lot harder to make the stuff we do cut to images because... it's so hard. It's very unpredictable. It's so hard to keep track of it all the time.
So it would have to be a very special marriage between the filmmakers and yourselves and the script, which would basically fundamentally be a script, but you would allow adaptations in terms of continuing on.
But it is tricky to do that. The way we make the music, the way the music is made. There is a lot of unpredictability. There is a lot of just having to there's a lot of maintaining equilibrium, like trying to keep things in motion and so it's, whereas composers generally score to image, they have the footage they need to accompany and they write to that. And while we would certainly try and do that with HowlRound, it's not easy.
More likely to be the other way around.
Exactly.
I don't see that as being impossible. You just have to have a very kind director and an editor.
Yeah. But it's an exciting way of working as well because you never quite know what you're going to get, which I like.
Yeah.
But obviously, it doesn't lend itself terribly well to a director who has a very strict idea about what they want.
Well, you don't want to pick.
But then
those
you can
people.
present. But then maybe you could present them ideas, and they could. I mean, there's always ways of doing these things.
I think one of my final questions now is: what do the actual, I was going to say, real guys and girls from the BBC workshop, the glory days of a radiophonic workshop? And I know you're involved working with some of these people, Mark Ayres, etc. What do they say about your work? And indeed, do you intend to work with any of them in the future on a project?
I'm always open for projects. I should say, I've interviewed Mark Ayres a couple of times. I wouldn't say we're working together.
But, I mean, have they listened to your music? Have they given you feedback?
Yeah.
Have they given you some Howlround?
Mark enjoyed the album. I think Mark enjoyed the album. I wouldn't put words in his mouth, but he seemed quite...
Was it just lots of white noise coming from his mouth?
He seemed quite into it. I don't know. I think the Radiophonic Workshop, they kind of have their thing that they do, and I have my thing that I do. And while I'm not... I mean, I've heard their new album, and it's great, and it's brilliant that they're back, and they're making new stuff and all that. But I think the danger with a lot of this stuff is to sort of get into a kind of a retro sort of fetishistic sort of, I mean, the thing is, ultimately, I'm trying to make new music, and I'm not using tape because it's very cool and very retro and very.
But you are a bit.
It's a fringe benefit, but if I didn't make sounds that interested me with tape, I wouldn't use it.
Okay.
I use tape a lot because of the way it transforms the sound, the way it degrades, the way it sort of, that kind of warm, fuzzy sound that it has. But the thing is, I like to think that, I'm making music. I think when you listen to Howlround stuff, you can tell that I've sort of grown up with dance music and electronic music and ambient music and things like that. So while obviously it's tipping its hat to all those guys in the 60s and 70s that came first and, or earlier, in the 50s even, there's a clear, I hope there's a clear lineage between what Pierre Schaeffer and Pierre Henry were doing in the early days of Musique Concrète and what I'm doing now. But I would say what they were doing was closer to the sort of classical tradition, the way they were thinking about composition, because they were still using scores and sort of thinking about...
Are we talking about those... were they French?
Yes.
Right, those are the people I think Verity Lambert wanted to do Doctor Who, the theme to.
No,
or am I
that's
getting mixed
the
up?
Lazare Bachet. I hope my pronunciation's correct. They did the... I'm not going to try and say it. The Le Structure Sonore. Don't leave that in. That's rubbish. Don't leave that in. That's rubbish. But I think with my stuff, you can hear that it's definitely paying an ode, paying homage to sort of dance music and club culture as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
To the sort of ambient music of the 90s and things like that.
Yeah. With a hint of Delia Derbyshire running those.
Yeah, but I think
we must
so
flag
much of
up
that
here.
music was inspired by her as well. Though,
yeah, we must flag up was a studio manager at the BBC.
She was, yeah, as was Daphne Oram, who founded the Radiophonic Workshop.
Bring it on. Bring it on.
I think technically she was a sound balancer, but it's a studio manager in all but name.
It's the same sort of thing. Well, listen, Robin the Fog, Sir of Fog, thank you so much for joining Scratch and Sniff tonight. I hope the future is rosy and indeed radiophonic. And just before you go, all our guests get a celebrity goodie bag, and you are no exception.
What a celebrity goodie bag!
Oh, there you go, sir.
Wow.
There you go.
Oh, thank you. Wow, this is quite a heavy celebrity good.
There we go.
Crumbs.
So, Mr. Robin, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
There's a white powder in here, Nick. What's that?